Everyone saw the flashing lights that night, blue and red spilling across the neighborhood like a storm no one invited. But almost no one asked why they were parked outside my sister's house, again. She hadn't broken the law, she hadn't hurt anyone. She was guilty of something smaller, something invisible to most, being different, being disabled. The truth is, my sister's body doesn't always obey her. A childhood accident left her walking with braces, her steps slow, deliberate. But her mind? Sharp as glass. She's the one who remembers everyone's birthdays, who leaves flowers at the doorsteps of neighbors going through hard times. She's the one who, somehow, still believes people are good. But the HOA didn't see her heart. They saw weeds growing too high after a rainy week she couldn't manage. They saw her ramp painted white instead of beige. They saw her as a problem. It started with the letters, cold words typed in bold. Violations, fines, threats. She would read them at her kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly as if paper could weigh more than steel. She would fold them neatly, stack them in a drawer, and whisper, "I'll figure it out." I didn't know then how bad it was getting. One evening, she called me in tears. Her voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since we were children. "They said if I don't fix everything by next week, they'll start legal action. I can't do it alone." When I drove over, her front yard looked almost perfect. A few leaves scattered across the walkway. Grass a little high near the fence, but nothing that deserved police cars on a quiet street. And yet days later, that's exactly what arrived. The first knock was hard enough to rattle the doorframe. My sister froze in her chair, staring at me like a child caught in a nightmare. I opened the door, and two officers stood there, hands resting too close to their holsters. "We've had complaints from the HOA," one of them said flatly, "about disturbances and noncompliance." Disturbances, noncompliance. Words that sound official but mean almost nothing. I asked what crime they believed she had committed. They didn't answer. They just asked to step inside. My sister's face went pale. I remember every second of that silence. How the house felt smaller, suffocating as the officer's boots crossed the threshold. How my sister tried to sit, to look strong, even as her leg brace dug into her skin. She said softly, "I haven't done anything wrong." But they didn't seem to hear her. They walked through her home like inspectors in a warehouse. Eyes on the ramp, the walls, the yard visible through the back window, writing things down, asking questions that weren't questions at all, but accusations wrapped in polite tones. And then one of them asked if she was fit to live alone. The words hit her harder than any fist could have. My sister's independence is her lifeline. It's what she's fought for since the accident. And now strangers in uniform were standing in her living room, suggesting she wasn't capable of surviving in her own home. I wanted to shout, to throw them out, but my sister shook her head slightly, telling me without words, "Don't make it worse." When they finally left, she sat in silence, her hands gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wouldn't look at me. She just whispered, "They'll come back." And I knew she was right. Because this wasn't about rules or property values. It was about power. About small people in high positions trying to control someone they thought couldn't fight back. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that she had family. And not just any family. Two brothers who had been trained to survive the impossible. Two men who had worn the uniform, faced war zones, and come back harder than steel. Twin Navy SEALs. Her brothers. And when they heard what happened, the game changed. Why do the smallest men in power always think they can bully the quiet ones? That question burned in my chest the next morning when I called my brothers. They were stationed states apart, still moving in and out of training cycles that kept their lives stitched tight with discipline and silence. But the second they heard my voice shake, the second they heard about cops harassing our sister because of a ramp and a patch of grass, the line went quiet. I knew that silence, it wasn't disbelief, it was fury being measured. My twin brothers are identical in looks but not in temperament. One is fire, quick, sharp, impossible to contain. The other is ice, methodical, patient, the kind of calm that makes people nervous. Together they had always been unstoppable, even as kids. And now, After years as Navy SEALs, with scars they'd never show and medals they'd never speak about, they were more dangerous than the HOA or the cops could ever imagine. "Send me everything," the calmer one finally said. "Every letter, every complaint, every detail." The other just muttered, "They won't touch her again." When they arrived days later, the neighborhood noticed. Two tall men stepping out of a black SUV, shoulders squared like they carried mountains. They didn't smile. They didn't wave. They walked up to our sister's door as if they were returning from deployment straight into another battle. My sister's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. Her arms shook as she reached for them, tears blurring her smile. For a moment, she wasn't the woman cornered by her own neighborhood. She was the little sister being protected by her heroes. But even in that moment of warmth, something darker lingered, because we knew this wasn't over. That night, over takeout containers and coffee gone cold, we spread the HOA letters across the table. Page after page of veiled threats, citations for nonsense, deadlines impossible to meet. My brothers didn't speak at first. They just read, every word, every date, every signature. Finally, the fiery one slammed his fist on the table, rattling the silverware. "This isn't enforcement. This is harassment." The calmer one nodded slowly. "Calculated, too. They're building a case, not against the property, against her." "Against her." Those words sank into me like lead. Because my sister wasn't just fighting weeds and paint colors. She was fighting a system designed to break her, to shame her, to drive her out of the only home she had left. The next morning we saw them again, the cops. Same car, same routine, parking outside like wolves circling prey. Only this time, when the knock hit the door, it wasn't me who opened it. It was them. Two Navy SEALs standing shoulder to shoulder in the doorway, eyes unblinking, jaws tight. The officers froze, suddenly unsure of themselves. Their practiced authority faltered in the presence of men who had faced real danger, not HOA complaints. "State your business," my calmer brother said evenly. His tone wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, but it carried a weight that made the air itself hesitate. The officers exchanged glances, mumbled something about follow-up checks, tried to sidestep with vague language, but the fiery one leaned forward, voice low and sharp. "She's not your problem, she's not your project, and she's not alone anymore." The silence that followed was thick. The cops shifted, their authority slipping away inch by inch. Finally, one of them muttered they'd be in touch with the HOA and backed down the steps. For the first time in weeks, my sister exhaled. But we all knew bullies don't disappear just because they're challenged. They regroup, they find another angle. Later that evening, a new letter slid under the door. No envelope, no explanation, just one line typed in bold across the page. "This neighborhood has standards. Remove the ramp or face consequences." My sister's hand trembled as she held it. My fiery brother tore it in half before she could finish reading. But my calmer brother picked up the pieces, studied them, and whispered something that made the room still. "They're not just after her house, they're after her dignity." And in that moment, we understood something that chilled us all. This fight wasn't about rules or regulations anymore. It was about control, about forcing her to surrender. But surrender was never an option. Not for her. Not with us behind her. And definitely not with two Navy SEALs watching the door. Everyone thought it was just a ramp, a slab of wood and steel painted white. But what they didn't see, what they refused to understand, was that it was her lifeline. Without it, she couldn't get in and out of her own home. Without it, she was trapped. So when that anonymous letter demanded its removal, it wasn't just cruel. It was a threat to her freedom. That night, my brothers didn't sleep. They stayed at the table, speaking in low voices like men planning a mission. Old instincts flickered through their movements, the way they scanned the windows, the way they positioned their chairs with their backs to the walls. You could tell they had slipped into something they hadn't worn in years: combat readiness. My sister tried to laugh it off, as if the weight of two combat-hardened men guarding her door was excessive. But in her eyes, I saw something else. Relief. For the first time in months, she wasn't alone in her fear. The next morning, the HOA president himself showed up. He was a small man with a too-perfect suit, the kind of person who smiled with his mouth but never his eyes. He didn't knock. He rang the bell with short, impatient bursts until the fiery twin pulled open the door. "We need to have a conversation," the man said smoothly, trying to look past my brother into the house. "No," came the reply, one word, "final." The president bristled, as though years of petty power had conditioned him to never hear no. He cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and tried again. "Your sister has been in violation for months. The ramp, the paint, the overgrown grass." "It's her house," my calmer brother interrupted, voice steady as stone. "Her ramp, her life, she's done nothing wrong." The man chuckled, a sound that carried no humor. "You think this is about right and wrong? This is about rules, and rules don't care about feelings." My fiery brother stepped forward then, so close that the president's fake smile faltered. "And rules don't protect cowards who target disabled women," he growled. The president tried to recover, but the damage was done. He stammered something about legal recourse and hurried off, his polished shoes clicking too fast on the pavement. We thought maybe, just maybe, that confrontation would buy some peace. But later that week, the police came again. This time, they didn't knock. They walked straight into the yard, flashlights scanning the property as if hunting for contraband. My sister sat frozen by the window, whispering, "Why won't they leave me alone?" That's when my calmer brother stepped outside. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply walked up to the officers, squared his shoulders, and asked, "Do you have a warrant?" They didn't. The silence that followed was deafening. One officer cleared his throat, muttered something about community safety, and shifted uncomfortably. My brother didn't move. "Then you're trespassing," he said flatly. "Leave." And for the first time, they did. But victory felt hollow, because deep down we all knew the HOA wasn't finished. This wasn't just a battle of citations, it was a war of attrition. They wanted to wear her down until she broke, until she gave up her home. That night, as we sat around the table again, my sister finally spoke words she had kept buried for months. "I can't fight them forever," she whispered. "I don't have the strength." Her voice cracked and tears slid down her cheeks. For someone as proud as her, admitting that was harder than any fine, any letter, any knock on the door. The fiery twin leaned forward, eyes burning. "Then you don't fight alone." The calmer one placed a hand gently on hers. "Sometimes strength isn't about standing by yourself. It's about knowing when to let others stand with you." And in that moment, something shifted. She wasn't just the target anymore. She was the cause, the reason, the anchor that bound us all together. We didn't say it out loud, but we all felt the same thing. Whatever it took, however far this went, we weren't backing down. Because sometimes the fight isn't about winning. Sometimes it's about refusing to surrender your dignity, no matter how many people try to strip it away. And that was something none of us were willing to let her lose. What happens when rules are twisted into weapons? When the people sworn to protect a neighborhood become the very ones who poison it? We found out the following week. A thick envelope arrived, heavier than the rest. Inside wasn't a fine or a threat or even the usual list of violations. It was worse. It was a notice of legal action. The HOA was suing my sister. Their claim that her ramp was a nuisance, lowering the property value of the homes around it. My sister's hands trembled as she read the words. She whispered them out loud as if saying them would make them less real, but her voice broke halfway through. "A nuisance," she said. "My ramp is a nuisance." The fire in my brother's eyes could lit the room. He wanted to storm straight to the president's house, drag him out by the collar, and make him explain how a disabled woman's lifeline could ever be called a nuisance. But the calmer twin stopped him, gripping his arm with steady strength. "Not yet," he said. "This isn't a fight of fists, not now. They want us to lose control. We can't." But rage doesn't vanish just because you silence it. It lingers, coils, waits. That night, my sister sat in her chair by the window, staring at the same ramp that had given her freedom, the same ramp that now threatened to take everything away. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. Maybe I should just take it down, she said. The room froze. Don't you dare, the fiery one snapped. Her eyes filled with tears. You don't understand, they'll never stop. They'll just keep coming until I give them what they want. The calmer one leaned forward, his voice low, steady, unyielding. Listen to me. You are not a burden, you are not a nuisance. You are the strongest person in this neighborhood and they know it. That's why they're attacking you, because your very existence reminds them they're small. She turned away, but the tears kept falling. And in that silence, I realized something. The HOA wasn't just trying to strip her of her dignity. They were trying to rewrite her story, to make her believe she didn't belong in her own home. But they underestimated her brothers. The next day, the fiery twin started digging. He went door to door, speaking with neighbors, collecting stories of harassment, intimidation, and selective enforcement. Turns out my sister wasn't the first. Families with kids, elderly couples, even veterans, all had been cornered by the HOA's petty power games. Meanwhile, the calmer twin reached out to legal contacts, quietly, carefully. A retired JAG lawyer owed him a favor, and when he heard what was happening, his answer was simple. I'll take the case. It gave us hope, but hope doesn't erase fear. Because 2 nights later, headlights swept across the yard long past midnight. A car idled at the curb, engine humming. My sister sat frozen again, clutching the arms of her chair. She whispered, "They're watching me." The fiery one was already moving, pulling on his boots, stepping into the night like a predator answering a challenge. He walked straight to the car, hands at his sides, posture loose but lethal. The engine revved, tires screeched, and the car sped off into the dark. When he came back inside, his face was a mask of fury. "They're trying to scare her into running," he said. But fear only works if it's one against many, and she wasn't one anymore. The calmer twin looked at her, his voice like stone. "Let them come. Every battle teaches us who they are, and every battle brings us closer to ending this." Still, I couldn't shake the thought as I lay awake that night. How far would the HOA go? How far could cruelty stretch before it snapped? And what would happen the day it finally did? Everyone in the neighborhood whispered, but no one spoke out loud. That was the first thing my brothers noticed. People saw the flashing lights. They saw the patrol cars parked like predators. They saw the envelopes slipped under doors, but fear kept them quiet. Until my brothers started knocking. They didn't come with threats, they came with questions, simple human questions. Has this happened to you? Did they target your family too? And slowly the silence cracked. One by one, stories spilled out. An elderly couple fined for unsightly garden gnomes. A young mother threatened with eviction because her toddler's toys were left on the porch. A veteran who came home from deployment to find liens placed on his property over unapproved paint colors. Each story carried the same pattern: selective enforcement, intimidation, humiliation. The HOA wasn't just managing the neighborhood. They were running it like a dictatorship, and my sister had become their latest example. When the fiery twin returned with pages of handwritten statements, he slapped them down on the table. "It's not just her," he said. "It's everyone. She's just the one they think is weakest." The calmer one nodded slowly. "Then that's their mistake." That night I watched my brothers turn a kitchen table into a war room. Papers spread like battle maps. Names, dates, patterns. They weren't just defending anymore, they were planning. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. But while they prepared, my sister wrestled with her own demons. I caught her in the hallway one evening, staring at a photo of us as children. Her braces were new then, shiny and awkward. She touched the glass with trembling fingers and whispered, "I don't want them to hate me. I just wanted to belong." Her words broke me, because that was the part. She never asked for special treatment. She never wanted sympathy. She just wanted to live quietly in the home she'd built. But the HOA twisted that longing for normalcy into a weapon, using it against her like the sharpest blade. Sometimes cruelty doesn't scream. Sometimes it whispers, "You don't belong here." But my brothers wouldn't let that whisper become truth. The calmer twin contacted the retired JAG lawyer, sending every statement, every letter, every anonymous threat. His reply was immediate and fierce. This isn't enforcement, this is harassment, and it's illegal. The fiery one wasn't satisfied with just paperwork. He started documenting everything. Photos of the ramp, video of patrol cars circling the block, recordings of conversations with neighbors too afraid to come forward, evidence. Piece by piece, he was building an arsenal, one not of bullets, but of truth. Then came the moment that shifted everything. A neighbor slipped a manila folder under our door late at night. Inside were copies of internal HOA emails, and what they revealed made my stomach twist. Messages between board members mocking my sister, calling her dead weight, joking about teaching her a lesson, even discussing how to use the cops to pressure her out. It wasn't incompetence, it was a coordinated attack. When my sister read those words, her face crumpled. She pressed the folder to her chest and whispered, "Why do they hate me so much?" The fiery twin knelt beside her, his voice rough with emotion. "They don't hate you, they fear you. Because every time you step outside, every time you hold your head high, you remind them that strength doesn't look like them." The calmer twin added softly, "Sometimes dignity doesn't shout, sometimes it just refuses to break. That's why they'll never win." And in that dimly lit living room, I realized the truth. This fight had grown beyond our family, beyond one disabled woman and her ramp. It had become a battle for every quiet soul the HOA had tried to silence. The storm was coming. The HOA had declared war. But this time, my sister wasn't alone. And when my brothers took the offensive, the entire neighborhood would finally see the difference between power built on fear and power built on truth. Why do tyrants always underestimate the moment the quiet ones finally speak? That question echoed in my mind as we walked into the HOA board meeting. The room was packed than I'd ever seen, neighbors lined against the walls, eyes darting nervously, whispering to one another. Word had spread. People knew something was coming. At the front, the board sat like kings at a crooked table. The president straightened his tie, the smug smirk on his face radiating false confidence. He thought this would be another humiliation, another performance where he could dangle rules like chains. But he didn't know my brothers. The fiery twin entered first, shoulders squared, eyes locked on the board. Every step carried the weight of a man who'd walked through war zones and come out unbroken. Behind him, the calmer twin moved like a shadow, controlled, steady, unreadable. My sister sat between them, head held high, though I could see her hands trembling in her lap. When the president banged his gavel, the room fell silent. "We are here to address the matter of noncompliance regarding Ms. Anderson's property," he declared, voice smooth but sharp. "As you all know, there have been multiple violations." "Stop." One word, low, commanding. Everyone turned to the fiery twin who was already on his feet, eyes burning. "You've hidden behind rules long enough. Tonight we expose the truth." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The president tried to smirk, but the calmer twin rose then, sliding a folder across the table. "Emails," he said evenly. "Internal communications between you and your board, mocking my sister, calling her dead weight, admitting you've used the police as pawns in your intimidation." Gasps filled the room. The president's smirk faltered. The fiery one pulled out more papers, sworn statements from neighbors, photographs, videos. He slammed them onto the table. "This isn't management, it's harassment, it's abuse of power, and it ends tonight." The board members shifted in their seats, sweat glistening on their foreheads, but the president leaned back, forcing a laugh. "You think a few scraps of paper scare me? Rules are rules, and the ramp is a violation." That's when my sister spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, it wasn't sharp, but it was steady, clear, stronger than I'd ever heard it before. "This ramp is my freedom. Without it, I'm trapped in my own home, and you dare to call it a nuisance." The room went silent. Even the president's laughter died in his throat. "I've spent my life fighting for scraps of independence," she continued, her eyes wet but unblinking. "And every time I climb that ramp, I remember I can still live, still breathe, still be me. But you want to take that away just because it doesn't fit your idea of perfect." A hush fell so deep you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Neighbors shifted, their whispers turning into something else. Agreement, anger, support. The calmer twin leaned forward then, his voice low, almost a whisper, but it carried across the room like thunder. Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who shout the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones who survive in silence until silence becomes unbearable. The fiery one added, his tone sharp as steel, "We're done being silent." The president tried to regain control, banging his gavel again, but the sound was swallowed by the growing voices of the crowd. Neighbors began speaking up, about their fines, their threats, their humiliations. The room transformed into a chorus of defiance, and for the first time the board was outnumbered. The president's face went pale. His eyes darted, searching for control, but it was gone. He muttered about legal consequences, but no one listened anymore. Because the truth was out. And once truth takes root, fear loses its grip. That night, as we walked out of the meeting, neighbors clapped my sister on the shoulder. They whispered words of courage, of solidarity. And though she still trembled, her smile broke through, fragile but real. But as we reached the car, the fiery twin's expression hardened. "They won't stop here," he muttered. "Men like that never do. They'll push harder, dirtier. We need to be ready." The calmer one nodded. War isn't won in one battle. And as headlights lit the dark street outside, I knew he was right. The HOA had been exposed, yes, but cornered animals are the most dangerous. The real fight was only just beginning. Everyone thought the board meeting was the end. Neighbors left that night whispering about change, about justice, about finally standing up. But people like the HOA president don't lose quietly. They don't fade into the background. They strike back. It started with the patrol cars again. Only this time they didn't just idle at the curb. They pulled into the driveway, flashing lights, radios crackling, a knock so loud it made my sister jump in her chair. When my fiery brother opened the door, 2 officers stood there with folded papers. A noise complaint filed against my sister. She stared at them in disbelief. "Noise complaint? I live alone. I don't even own a stereo." The officers avoided her eyes. They just handed over the citation and left. The next day, another letter. This one accused her of endangering the community by allowing unsafe conditions on her property. They claimed her ramp didn't meet standards, even though it had been approved years before. Then an anonymous voicemail, a low, mocking voice. "Maybe it's time you moved somewhere easier, somewhere you belong." Every new blow chipped at her. I saw it in her eyes, the way she hesitated before stepping outside, the way her shoulders curled inward as though bracing for impact. The board hadn't silenced her at the meeting, so now they were trying to crush her spirit in the shadows. But my brothers were ready. The fiery one started keeping watch at night, sitting on the porch like a sentinel, his eyes scanning every passing car. The calmer one doubled down with the lawyer filing countersuits, requesting records, demanding accountability. Still, the attacks grew bolder. One afternoon, we came home to find the ramp defaced, spray paint across the boards. "Eyesore!" My sister gasped, covering her mouth, her whole body trembling. She reached for the rail, but her hand stopped short, as though touching it would burn. The fiery twin's hands curled into fists so tight his knuckles bled. He wanted blood. I could see it in his eyes, but the calmer one stepped between him and the street. "Not like this," he said. "Not their way." That night I sat with my sister while she cried quietly into her hands. She whispered, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong here." It broke me, because that was the lie they wanted her to believe, that she was less, that her existence was a burden, that her independence was an inconvenience to their false image of perfection. The fiery twin knelt before her, his voice shaking with emotion. "Listen to me. You have more courage in one day than they'll ever know in a lifetime. You fought battles they can't even imagine. You are not leaving this house." The calmer twin placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low, steady. "Sometimes the world tries to erase people it doesn't understand, but survival is defiance, and you've survived everything they've thrown at you." Her tears slowed. Her breathing steadied, and in that fragile moment I saw her strength flicker back to life, Not loud, not overwhelming, but quiet and steady, like embers refusing to die. But the war wasn't over, because the very next morning a court summons arrived. The HOA was demanding a formal hearing, with lawyers, with fines stacked so high they threatened to bury her under debt. The fiery twins slammed the papers down. This is it. They want to break her once and for all. The calmer one's eyes narrowed. Then we give them something they don't expect. We don't just fight back, we expose them. That night, as they prepared evidence, I felt the weight of everything pressing in. The flashing lights, the mocking emails, the spray paint, the fear etched into my sister's face. It was all coming to a head. The HOA thought they'd cornered her. That fear would do their work for them. But they didn't understand. They hadn't just picked a fight with a woman in a wheelchair. They had picked a fight with her family, with Navy SEALs who had stared down war and refused to blink. And this time, the whole community would be watching. The final showdown wasn't coming someday. It was coming now. Everyone said it was just a hearing, just paperwork, just procedure. But when we stepped into that sterile room with its polished tables and stiff chairs, it felt like a battlefield. The HOA lined up on one side, their lawyer in an expensive suit, the president sitting smugly like a king awaiting tribute. My sister sat on the other side, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her brothers flanking her like shields. The judge entered, the gavel struck, and suddenly every heartbeat felt louder than the ticking clock on the wall. The HOA's lawyer went first, voice dripping with arrogance. He spoke of community standards, of eyesores, of nuisances that lower property values. He waved photographs of the ramp as though it were evidence of a crime. He even called neighbors concerned citizens, though we all knew the only concern was the board's lust for control. When he finished, the president leaned back in his chair, lips curling into that same smirk we'd seen 100 times. He thought it was already won. But then the calmer twin rose. His voice was steady, measured, every word sharp as a blade. He laid out the truth in order, letters, citations, threats. He presented the emails, the mocking words of board members who treated my sister like a joke. He showed the photographs of her ramp defaced with hate, the videos of police circling her home without cause. And then he said the words that made the room still. This isn't about property values. This is about power, about a group of people who believed they could bully a disabled woman into submission, and that ends today. The fiery twin didn't stay seated. He stood too, holding a stack of sworn statements from neighbors. One by one, he read them aloud. The elderly couple fined for garden gnomes. The veteran harassed over paint colors. The young mother threatened over toys. Each story struck like a hammer, breaking the board's illusion of authority. By the time he was done, the room wasn't silent anymore. Neighbors who had come to watch were nodding, murmuring, leaning forward in their seats. The tide had shifted. And then my sister spoke. Her voice shook at first, but then it steadied, carrying across the room with a weight none of us expected. All I ever wanted was to live in peace, to belong in my own home. But they made me feel like a burden, like my existence was something to be ashamed of, and I almost believed them, almost, but I won't anymore. She looked straight at the board, her eyes glistened, but her voice was unyielding. I am not a nuisance, I am not your enemy, I am a neighbor, and I am not leaving my home. For the first time, the president's smirk cracked. The judge leaned forward, brows knit tight. He shuffled through the evidence, the statements, the photographs. Finally, his gavel struck again. His voice was firm, almost thunderous. This board has not acted in the best interests of the community. What I see here is targeted harassment, abuse of authority, and reckless misuse of law enforcement resources. This case is dismissed. Effective immediately, this ramp stays. And I strongly suggest the members of this HOA reconsider their positions. The gavel fell a final time. It was over. The president's face flushed red, his lawyer whispering furiously in his ear. But the neighbors were already turning away from him. Whispers rose into voices, voices into cheers. People who had been silent for months, maybe years, now stood tall. And in that noise, I saw something break, the board's grip on the neighborhood shattered by truth. My sister wept quietly, tears streaking her face. But this time they weren't tears of fear, they were tears of release, of victory. The fiery twin put an arm around her shoulders, whispering, "They'll never touch you again." The calmer one added softly, "Sometimes dignity looks like survival, and today you survived with more grace than they'll ever know." As we walked out into the sunlight, the neighbors followed, clapping my sister on the back, shaking her hand, thanking her for standing when they could not. She was no longer just a woman with a ramp. She was a symbol, proof that even in the quietest voices there is power strong enough to break chains. And as my brothers flanked her, tall and unshakable, I realized something I'll never forget. The HOA tried to take her home. Instead, they gave her a legacy. Because sometimes, the greatest victories are not won on battlefields or in war zones. Sometimes, they're won in the hearts of ordinary people, by refusing to bow, refusing to break, and refusing to surrender what makes you human.